In this presentation, we will combine the debits and credits columns into one column within Excel within our trial balance. Note that this is going to be the most controversial step within the system that we are using to set up our worksheet. It's also going to be the one that's going to save the most time. It's going to reduce the data to be the most manageable format that it can be in and reduce the complications of the formulas that will be necessary. We'll explain more on why and how it does that later. But for now, just be aware that many people are really like having a debit and credit column for each section of the worksheet, even though it's a lot more efficient to combine the debits and credits in the format we're having here. So therefore, if you try to implement this somewhere, you may run into some resistance, and just be aware of that. We'll try to show both formats, a worksheet that will have a debit and credit column for each section as well, so you can note the difference and look at the pros and cons and use whatever system is in place where you are at. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Here we are in our trial balance. Our goal now is to move the credits into one column so that when we create then an adjusting column and an adjusted trial balance and then a tax adjustments and then tax trial balance, we don't end up with 8 columns or so, but rather have far fewer columns by reducing the amount of data. So to do that, we're going to make these numbers be negatives for Excel, meaning all credits, we're going to make them negative for Excel, and therefore we will determine whether we are in balance not by having a debit and credit column for each segment of our financial statement, but rather to have the debits minus the credits equal 0 for each segment, and that'll really help reduce the information that we need, and it'll really help for actual calculations as well. So let's do that now. The way we're going to do that is we're just going to go through all the credits and just flip the sign of them. I'm going to double click on, to do that, I'm going to do this manually. So I'm just going to double click on it, put a negative in front of the 1 for all credit amounts, and then enter. And it'll flip formatting for us as we told it to do. So negative numbers being formatted as bracketed negative numbers. Also note that I've increased it over here a little bit to 140. So I'll make it even a little larger, maybe even 160, 170. So we can zoom in. Okay, so we're at 180%. I'm going to do the same for the Visa card. Just double click on that and we'll put a negative. There may be a function to do this all at one time, but this really doesn't take too much time to do manually for most trial balances. So I'm just going to go through here and manually put a negative in front of all the credits. And as we do so, it'll flip the sign of the total, and we will then remain in balance. And so we've got the one more here, the one more credit, just putting a negative in front of it. So all we did is just manually take everything in the credit column, make it negative. Now we know that we're in balance. Well, we didn't do it quite yet. The last two. We're going to do that. And of course, we know if we're not done yet because we're not in balance. It'll still be in balance, but negative when we're done. And so let's just double click on these last two, negative and negative. So now we know we're in balance because the debits equal the credits. Now that the credits are represented by negative numbers, we're still in balance. Now what we want to do is just pull all these negatives into the debit side so it's in the same column. And then it'll be summing up this column, and this column then will sum up to 0. To do that, we're going to scroll up top. I usually do it by selecting the cells that are there. I can't skip cells. No, don't do this, but if I did this and pulled it over, then it'll try to copy over this cell, and I don't want to do that. I can only do it for I'm going to cancel that, for the ones that are in a row, adjacent or next to each other, not for these items. So I'll select these items, then I put my cursor right in the middle so it looks like that, the cursor looks like that, and I drag it over. So I left click and drag it over. The other way you can do it, if I undo that, undo, this is just for an example, you could right click on it and cut it, and then put it in this cell, right click and paste 1, 2, 3. Those functions are actually the same if you drag it over or cut and paste it. Whatever's easier for you to do. I like to drag it, so I'm going to select these items, all these red items, just going to drag them over, put my cursor on the side of the cell, drag it over, And there we have that. Scrolling down, put my cursor on the 40,500, put my cursor on the side of the cell, left click, drag it over. And then one more, we're just going to select these two, let go, put our cursor on the side of the cell, and drag it over. Left click and drag it over. So now we're at zeros here, and we're in balance just by that being zero. And now I don't need this other side. I don't need the column C. So I'm just going to select the entire column by putting our cursor on the drop down, left click on it, right click on the selected area, and then delete that whole column. And so this is what we have now. And now we can see we're in balance. And note how much easier the calculations are here. Because we have the positive and negative numbers, we can do so much more in terms of if I want to know, for example, the equity, what net equity is, it's going to be assets. If I add up the assets minus the liabilities, then here are the liabilities down to here. And it just calculates for us 203,606. Whereas if these numbers were positive, then we'd have to add these up and then subtract these out. The formula would be much more complex. And as we'll do shortly, the net income is really easy to calculate, meaning we're just going to say the net income is these credits minus these debits, and that we have a reverse on the rent expense. And we'll have to take a look at that, but here's what we have, and it's the 53,310. And that's net income, even though the credits are winning. So as long as we understand the debits and credits, the calculation of net income is a lot easier, because obviously if we had these were all positive numbers in the debit and credit column, we'd have to take the credit column side minus the debit column side on the income statement accounts. And that might, it's a little bit easier to do these types of calculations if they're all in one column most of the time. So this is what we have so far. Our major check number will of course be this number, and that means that the debits and credits equal zero. So this is just, we could label that here, total debits are equal to total credits. So that's going to be our indication. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.